Lesson 34, useCallback. 1. Introduction. Good morning, afternoon everyone. Today we will talk about the React hook called useCallback. The goal is to understand what it does, when and why you might use it, and also when it may not be needed. By the end of this talk, you should have a solid mental model of useCallback and be able to decide whether it is appropriate in your component design. 2. What is useCallback? useCallback is a hook in React that allows you to preserve, or cache, a function definition between renders, so that if its dependencies haven't changed, you get back the same function instance on subsequent renders. In other words, when your component re-renders, useCallback helps you avoid creating a brand new function each time, provided the inputs it depends on are stable. 3. How it works in broad strokes. When you call useCallback, you pass two things: a function you want to preserve and a list of dependencies, values that the function uses from the component's scope. On the first render, the hook returns the function you passed in. On subsequent renders, React checks whether any of the listed dependencies have changed, using an algorithm similar to object.is for comparison. If none have changed, you get back the same function you got last time. If any have changed, you receive the new function defined in this render, and that becomes the new, cached, value going forward. Also, since useCallback is a hook, it must be called at the top level of your component, or custom hook, and not conditionally or inside loops. 4. Why and when you might use it. useCallback is primarily a performance optimization tool. It becomes useful when you pass a function down to a child component that uses memoization. For instance, the child only re-renders if its props changed. If you keep passing a new function instance each render, the child sees its prop changed and will re-render even though logically nothing changed. useCallback lets you keep the function stable so the child can skip re-rendering when appropriate. You use a function as a dependency of another hook, for example an effect. If you recreate the function each render, that dependency has changed and the effect will rerun unnecessarily. useCallback can stabilize that function. In these cases, useCallback helps control the identity of functions so you can avoid unnecessary work in child components or effects. 5. When you should not overuse it. It's important to recognize that you don't always need useCallback. If your component is simple, the children are light, you don't pass functions into memoized children or effects, then you may introduce complexity without material benefit. Over-memoization can hurt readability and maintainability, and still may not provide gain if dependencies are constantly changing anyway. So the guiding rule: make sure that the performance bottleneck is real, e.g., profiling shows a slow child render or effect, before introducing hooks like useCallback. If everything is running fine, you may defer this optimization. 6. Common pitfalls and caveats. There are a few things to watch out for. If you forget to pass the dependencies array, or pass it incorrectly, you lose the benefit. You might end up with a new function each render or stale values inside the function. If one of your dependencies changes on every render, perhaps because it's an object or array recreated each time, then the hook will return a new function each time anyway, so no benefit. You cannot call useCallback inside a loop or inside a conditional or nested inside other hooks in a way that violates the rules of hooks. If you need many callbacks, for example one per list item, you should pull that logic into a separate component. Just because you use useCallback doesn't mean React prevents the function creation. The creation still happens, you still define a function. What you gain is that React gives you back the previous instance when dependencies stay the same. 7. Relationship with other hooks. Use memo for comparison. useCallback is closely related to another hook called useMemo. The difference is subtle but meaningful. Use memo caches the result of calling a function, i.e., an expensive value, whereas useCallback caches the function itself. Say use memo is good when you compute something and want to avoid recomputing, while useCallback is good when you want to avoid passing down a new function instance between renders. 8. How to decide. Quick checklist. When you're considering using useCallback, ask, am I passing this function to a memoized child or component that cares about prop identity? Is this function used in a dependency list of a hook, effect, custom hook, etc.? Have I already profiled the component and determined there's an unnecessary render or effect triggered by a changing function? Are the dependencies of this function stable so that the benefit will actually happen? If you answer yes to one of the first two and yes to the third, you have a measurable issue, then useCallback makes sense. If not, you may skip it for now. 9. Summary. To wrap up, useCallback is a tool in React that helps you stabilize function identities across renders when dependencies remain unchanged. It is useful for optimizing performance in specific scenarios, such as passing a function to a memoized child or using a function in a dependency list. But it is not a default requirement for every function and must be applied with understanding of when it provides value. Like any optimization, it should rely on evidence or profiling rather than assumption. 10. Closing and next steps. Thank you for your attention. As next steps, I encourage you to reflect on your components. Identify places where you pass functions as props or use functions in effect dependencies, and consider whether useCallback might help. Also remember to measure and evaluate before and after applying it. In our next lesson, we will explore more advanced patterns of hooks and custom hooks, and how these optimizations fit into more complex component designs.